recevoir un professeur qui nous vient de Californie. C'est Jim Hollan, qui est professeur de sciences cognitives et d'informatique à l'Université de Californie, San Diego. C'est une personne influente dans le domaine des interactions homme-machine, dans le domaine aussi du design d'interaction. Il a notamment fondé en compagnie d'Edwin Hutchins, c'est aussi un grand nom dans le domaine des sciences cognitives. Il a fondé en compagnie d'Edwin Hutchins le Distributed Cognition and Human Computer Interaction, donc un laboratoire dédié à la cognition distribuée. L'idée finalement que la cognition, c'est pas seulement une personne, c'est des réseaux de personnes, non seulement des réseaux de personnes, mais aussi des réseaux de machines, des outils, des systèmes. Et puis, il a travaillé donc principalement dans le domaine des interactions de machines, la question de la cognition distribuée, la question aussi de la cognition incorporée, donc embodied cognition, et puis des interactions multimodales, la question aussi de visualisation des informations. Enfin, beaucoup de travaux. Si vous regardez ces références, eh bien, vous allez en trouver beaucoup influentes. Donc, voilà. Alors, la présentation est en anglais. So I'm going to switch to English and thank Jim Hollan for being with us. Thank you so much. This is a great honor to have you. And I'll give you the mic.
Thank you. I apologize that I'm monolingual, and so I'm restricted in communicating to lots of people in the world, but I'll do the best I can. So I'm really pleased to be here. I just flew back from the US yesterday, so I'm pretty jet lagged. So if you see the effect of that, it's just things. So what I want to do today is tell you a little bit about some work I did before almost all of you were born, so 30 years ago, and I want to sort of reflect back on that. But before I start, I want to give an ad for some of my current work. I'm incredibly interested today in the fact that we're all in these silos. Your work is sort of spread over Dropbox and Google Drive, and there was this. Let's see, it's like too far ahead. Let me see. Huh. Okay. So I just wrote two proposals since I've been in France. So I'm on sabbatical at Paris for the year. And one of them was to establish a research network. There's a program in the US to link labs in the US with labs outside the US. And so I've been doing a lot of collaboration with folks in Paris and also at Aarhus University in Denmark. And so I put together a proposal. It's to link all of these labs. So not very clear to me, but maybe it is to you. This is with one of my former students who's now a faculty at MIT, and Manish Agarwala, who's faculty at Stanford. And I would love to see other labs in Europe involved in this effort. And what we're sort of really looking for is to sort of create a place for intellectual work, sort of a personal information space. We have no place to work. I mean, for a while we had the desktop, and the desktop, lots of people put all their stuff there on the desktop on your computer, but it just doesn't scale to the kind of work we're doing today. And so we're very much involved in how to build a sort of personal information space, a space that would grow with you, would keep your stuff together, would allow you to see it in ways that are natural for you, would link it with other information. And I'm not going to say much about that today, but be happy to come back and talk more about that in the future. So I'm on sabbatical for the year at this Paris Institute for Advanced Study, which is actually directed by one of my really great friends over the years, Saudi Lalou. And Saudi and I have collaborated for many years. And Saudi, one of the things he's well known for is looking at sort of first-person video, sort of putting small cameras on your glasses, so you get this very human view of activity. And we've collaborated on that, and we're very interested in that kind of ethnographic first-person view of, we just don't know much about what people really do. We don't even know much about what we ourselves do. And I think it's a really, really rich thing to look at real human activity and what people are really doing. And so Saudi invited me. Actually, I had to apply for coming, and so we've been collaborating on that. So I'm leaving. This is where I was last week. This is my favorite surf break in San Diego, and I'm a surfer. And one of the hardest things about being here is not being there. But the exchange is not too bad. This is the first day I arrived in September at the Institute, and this is a wonderful historic building on the Seine. This is a view out the front door of the Institute. So there's water involved, but a different kind of thing. Okay, so I want to talk about this paper that I don't know that I would ever be talking about work that I did 30 years ago, but I think it's relevant to some of the things going on today. And it was incredibly enjoyable sort of reflecting back on the work from the perspective of the world today. And the real point of the paper was to look at alternatives to just mimicking face-to-face interaction. Not that face-to-face interaction is bad or that, but a lot of the work that was going on, and I'll talk about some of that context, was very much sort of only oriented towards that. And Scott and I thought that that was sort of cutting off a big part of the possible design space for computer-mediated kind of interaction. So if we look back at that time, I had just, I foolishly left UCSD for a whole decade. And part of that time, I went to Bell Labs and Bellcore. Bellcore was sort of Bell Labs got split up into two components. And Bellcore was sort of the research arm for what was then known as the Baby Bells, the phone companies. And I started a group, Computer Graphics and Interactive Media, at that time. And we were very involved in some early efforts to build zoomable interfaces, sort of, and not just geometric zooming, but what we called semantic zooming. So as you got closer to something, you didn't only get it seeing smaller, but you might see it totally different. So if you zoomed into a book, you might first see the table of contents and then be able to zoom into chapters and zoom into things. And zooming has turned out, as all of we do a lot of pinching and stuff on our phones and devices and stuff, been a really interesting thing. And I think it's underexplored the importance of like 2D with multi-scale kind of thing. And we spent a lot of time sort of looking at that kind of thing. And we licensed this to Sony for $500,000. And I think there's just a lot of things, and this environment that we're thinking of building now is going to be very much oriented toward that, of sort of a multi-scale zoomable space, sort of like a infinite resolution sheet of paper that you can have all of your information on, and that you can look at it in different ways. So you might put a lens over the information and see it historically in terms of the time that you acquired it, or it might be able to put a lens on it and see the papers that have references about folks that you collaborate with or whose work you respect or that kind of thing. So anyway, so we're really involved in building that kind of multi-scale kind of space in those days. And we're working on those days on these big machines from Silicon Graphics. This is an SGI reality engine, it was known as, doing sort of really high resolution kinds of graphics in those days. And SGI was a really incredible company at the time. It was in a building in Mountain View that's now occupied by Google. So Silicon Graphics went this way and Google went this way, kind of thing. And the thing that was going on at the time was the larger card there in the back is actually the card for the Silicon Graphics reality engine. And at the time in the early 1990s, when we were working on this Beyond Being There paper, all of us knew that that kind of graphics were going to be on the smaller card there in the middle that was going to be on PCs. So suddenly there was going to be this change where the kinds of things that were only possible on these $100,000 very expensive processors were going to be on everyone's laptop and everyone's PC kind of thing. So we saw it as a time when that there was going to be a real explosion of new kinds of interfaces and new kinds of ways of people interacting. And it was also the time at the beginning of this work on information visualization, suddenly trying to make information sort of visible to us. That it's no longer just the sort of dead bits of paper or kind of documents, but we could look at it in new ways and see relationships between it. And Stu Card, about the time I was starting this group at Belcor, Stu Card was starting a group at Park where they built this kind of information visualizer that sort of started to explore and sort of started this whole field of information visualization. So that's sort of part of the kind of time that we were in at those times. And there were lots of other interesting video-related things going on at the time. Xerox PARC had started a research lab in England called EuroPark. And they were building these kind of video spaces kind of thing to look at video kinds of interaction. And there was this wonderful project by Pierre Wellner called the Digital Desk, where Pierre had a situation where he would project onto a desk surface, and then you could interact with that projected information, you know, in ways. And it was sort of like breaking that boundary between the digital and the physical, that suddenly this digital stuff could be just interacted with my hands on kind of thing. So really exciting kind of change. And at lots of places, there were interesting things going on. This is Hiroshi Ishii. He's now at the Media Lab, but in those days was at NTT in Japan. And he built this really innovative system called Clearboard. And there's Hiroshi sitting on one side of it. He's dealing with someone else at a distance. And it feels like they're just on the other side of this piece of glass. So you can look at them, they can look at you. It does all of the right things of being able to write on the shared surface, and it gets turned around so it looks the right way from both perspectives, kind of thing. So really interesting, you know, kind of make eye contact with folks and interact with them. That was also at the same conference on Being There paper was in. There were other papers in that thing. The work at EuroPark on video conferencing, and at Belcor, there was a lot of work called Cruiser System. So, you know, my desktop at the time looked like this. We had a computer and we had this video kind of connection. You could connect over the video to other folks. And so you had sort of a display, and you also had this video connection. And so there was a lot of work on how to support that kind of video kind of collaboration and work. And And so Scott and I were, you know, on the one hand, we were really impressed, and we knew that video conferencing was going to be a big thing and be a very important kind of thing. And we knew that ever since Engelbart's famous, you know, mother of all demos back in the 60s, where he sort of demonstrated a lot of this kind of video conferencing back in those days. But we were sort of taken by the fact, and I think it's a really good research strategy that I've used a lot, is to, when you're looking at research, look at the presuppositions of that research, the things that aren't questioned, the things that are just presupposed about it. And the thing that both Scott and I noticed here was that everyone sort of presupposed that face-to-face was the best kind of interaction. And, you know, and not that it's a bad kind of interaction at all. I mean, it's really wonderful, but we thought, like, well, we should think about that. And we started a project that internally was called Better Than Reality. So we're really presumptuous kind of thing of thinking of, like, well, we could do better than that. And we came across this quote from the Strand magazine about the pleasure telephone. In those days, Bell Labs and stuff were very interested in picture phones. And Bell Labs and this whole research effort were very, I think, limited by that they wanted to send bits back and forth, that their interest was in bits, you know, and not in information. And we tried to convince them of the importance of email and the importance of, you know, I remember making a presentation in those days about, you know, well, you know, with these kind of online things, you could sell all kinds of things. You know, you could do, you know, which didn't exist in those, you could do eBay. You could do all of these kind of things. And it just fell on deaf ears at the company, because they sort of saw themselves as being in the business of moving bits and forth, back and forth between things. And the more bits, the better. So video was even better, you know, kind of thing. We can sort of dominate that kind of market. And so all the research that we saw that was going on was really about fidelity. You know, that you're going to solve this telecommunication problem by creating a sense of being there, you know, and that, and we found a quote in one of our colleagues' papers, the total effect is produce an environment at each end which is close as possible to being there. And so, you know, and again, I sort of emphasize that's not a bad research strategy, and there is incredible value in that. But it sort of cuts you off from this part of the design space where you try to do in the electronic medium, maybe things you can't do in face-to-face and might have advantages over face-to-face communication. And sort of two hands, I think, and that I sort of limited maybe one thing at this time. And if you look at the research, you know, it sort of supported that. You know, there was really the richness of face-to-face communication was just overpowered kind of thing. You know, face-to-face was really better than audio-video kind of communication. That was better than just audio, and that was better than written or email. So a lot of effort, a lot of reason to think that that's the case. But about that time, there was a study done at Belcor of this cruiser system, this video linkage. And Belcor, like lots of research labs, we would have in graduate students for summer internships. So we had all of these graduate students coming in. They were equipped with the same kind of environment we had, you know, a computer and this video kind of thing. And we wanted to study what use they made of the video kind of thing. And they made almost no use of the video. If they wanted to talk with someone, they might connect on video to see if they're in their office. Then they would go down and talk, you know, so face-to-face really dominated. I mean, it was really much more pleasurable to go and talk face-to-face than to be on this video link. And so we sort of started to think, well, you know, if one channel of communication is less than another, it's not going to, you're not going to use that channel in proportion, that proportion of time. You're probably not going to use it at all, or very, very little kind of thing. And so the idea we had was that the research that was going on was, just pouring more and more money and technology at approaching face-to-face kind of thing. And, you could get full duplex audio, you could get really higher resolution sound, you could try to deal with gaze and where people are looking and that kind of contact. And you could pour more and more technology and you could get closer and closer to that. And that's been a very, very, very valuable kind of direction. But it sort of ignores, it sort of sets as a standard face-to-face. And it leads you not to explore how you might do better in certain ways than face-to-face. And so that was the real genesis of the thing. And we had this analogy that we used at the time of thinking about someone with a broken leg who might use a crutch. And after their leg healed from the skiing accident or whatever, it would be really strange if they kept using the crutch. But there's other kinds of things that are tools, but are to increase our performance, to do better than that. So we wear, track shoes when we're running in various events. And we wear shoes rather than being barefoot because it's more comfortable and that kind of thing. So some tools do better than a natural state kind of thing. And so, and I'm sort of belaboring this point, but it was really key to us in thinking of it, that to think of face-to-face as being the ultimate gold standard, keeps you from looking at any kind of alternative to that, where you might be able to do better than that. And when you're trying to use one medium like another, you oftentimes can't do as well in that medium. We did a lot of work for many years looking at digital pens, and there's lots of benefit to paper kind of thing. And a lot of the work going on was to try to replace paper with digital kinds of stuff. And it's never quite as good. It's never as nice on my iPad with a pen than it is with paper and a pencil kind of thing. And we spent a lot of time looking at how we could have the best of both worlds. So how could we move things back and forth between those kind of worlds? So we could take digital kinds of stuff, put it out on paper, interact with it on paper, suck that back into the digital world. But oftentimes when you're trying to mimic one medium and another, you don't do as well as that. And also you're not led to think about what are the distinctive properties of this other medium that might be better than that. And we had all kinds of examples of that. In email kind of things. I mean, the asynchrony of email is still a big advantage. I can send an email when I want to, you respond to it when it's convenient for you. There's all kinds of things in the electronic thing where, I can be anonymous. It's very hard for me to be anonymous in face-to-face, but in electronic medium, I can be anonymous. And sometimes say you're discussing some very personal, say medical problem with groups of other people who have that kind of problem. It's very advantageous to be able to be anonymous, so you don't have to reveal who you are or that kind of thing. So there's really lots of examples where, the mechanisms of one medium can do a better job than the mechanisms of another. So we came up with this, not a theory, we called it a framework because it really there's not much there other than just putting together some ideas. But the framework was that there's underlying needs, human needs, that when met, encourage and facilitate interaction that are useful kind of thing. So the asynchrony of email, encourages a certain kind of interaction and has certain advantages to that and it solves our needs. It's very nice to be able to send the email when it's convenient for you and for someone to read it when it's convenient for them. And then media, and we think about media as some means of communication. So this kind of face-to-face communication we have is a kind of medium. And that's like absolutely key to this notion that thinking of this as just another medium was really key to the ideas that we were dealing with. That face-to-face is just a kind of medium kind of thing, and has certain properties is, there's certain mechanisms we can use in face-to-face kind of communication. So I use, eye glaze. I know you're looking at me and I'm looking at you, and we have sort of intersubjectivity of what's going on. We have all kinds of social things that, there are inappropriate distances for me to stand next to someone, especially when I don't have a mask on, these kind of days and stuff. And we have all of those kind of things. And then, thinking of mechanisms of are just ways of meeting those communication needs that are enabled by media. And I think that sort of defines the underlying ideas that we had, was sort of that we could look at, that all kinds of communication is trying to satisfy various needs and things that we have. And various media provides certain sets of mechanisms. And the wonderful thing about the electronic medium is we can make it mimic existing things, and we can also do all kinds of things that we can't do among existing kinds of face-to-face mediums. Okay, so I did all these. And at that time, we spent some time in the paper talking about, how email satisfied some of those things, and how social networking satisfies certain kinds of things, and how anonymity, is a kind of thing of the electronic medium that it has both negative and positive kinds of connotations. I mean, a lot of the things that we find in the anonymity of various social networks, where it sort of encourages a kind of behavior that oftentimes is not positive kind of things, with, flaming against people and doing all kinds of things. And we started to explore other kinds of things. We got very enamored of collaborative filtering, the kind of thing that Google is doing, that looking at, your clicks on things to try to determine what's relevant to various queries and stuff. We did one of the first collaborative filtering things where we sent out to people on a net news, a bulletin board system of the day, a set of movies, and had people rate those movies. And the payoff from that was they got recommendations of other movies. So a very early example of that kind of collaborative filtering. So that, I could take and, we'd send out this thing. We've got, thousands of responses, and we could build this kind of representation of the movies. And so, make recommendations of movies to you. I would look at other movies you liked and other people who liked those movies and what kind of things they liked. And that's sort of really the basis of a lot of collaborative filtering and stuff that's being done. But it's something that we can do in this electronic medium that would be really hard to do in others. We spent some time looking at what we called ephemeral interest groups. And the notion here was you would get an email, say I'm at Belcor, and I get an email about some talk that's coming up. And we made it so that you could join that email. You could sort of join that thing, and it created an ephemeral interest group, a group of all the people who joined that email. And so suddenly you had a way of communicating with those folks. So say I'm the person that's hosting someone coming in, and I've sent out a note about this talk today. I find out that they're delayed, their flight is delayed, they're going to be about 20 minutes late, we're going to start later. So suddenly I can send out that note, not to everyone, but to people that had joined that particular email. So that group existed only for that time. And then we found all kinds of things that we didn't really expect. We found that one of the things that happened with talks like that is after the talk, people realized that there was this group of people who were interested in that talk, and they could send a note to this ephemeral interest group that only went to those people. And they could talk about the talk. They'd say, I can't believe I can't believe that guy is really, has a faculty appointment. He's like, that was the worst talk I've ever heard. And it's the kind of thing you might, not that it would always be negative, but it's the kind of thing that you would say to people who are interested in the talk that you wouldn't say to a larger audience of folks like that. So it led us to look at that kind of mechanism within this kind of communicating medium to do something that, is almost impossible to do otherwise. And then it also led us to think about, if you think about that as a medium, you can think about things like synchronous and asynchronous, and you can start to think about that as a dimension. So it's not just asynchronous versus synchronous, but there could be something along the way. There could be semi-synchronous. And like in most kind of discussion groups that we're here, you send out some note on the discussion group, and the first person or the first couple of people that respond sort of frame the discussion. They might, have a very negative kind of reaction, and it's very hard to move the discussion away from that. But thinking about it as this kind of mechanism, you could imagine a semi-synchronous discussion, or it might batch up the first couple of hours of responses and send them all out at once, so that no one person or thing had a way of, sort of commandeering this to be about the thing that they care about or responding in some way. But again, lots of ideas that come from thinking in this mechanism kind of thing. In the paper, we did something that I've tried to do in other papers, and it's a good sort of technique, I think, is I tried at the end of the paper to respond to some potential criticisms of the paper. And I think it's very effective in writing a paper to think about, well, how are people going to respond to this, and take the opportunity in the paper itself to respond to those. So we knew that some people would sort of say that, there are lots of advantages to imitation. I mean, the desktop metaphor in itself is just this wonderful example of imitation, and it's sort of, stood the test of a long period of time. There's lots of advantages to imitation. It's like, it lets you use stuff that you already know, that suddenly, wow, this is a restaurant. And so there's certain kinds of things that I do there and all of that. So imitating that can be advantageous. And we said, sure, that's the case, but, how far can you take it? Are there really boundaries to that? And just like the desktop, there are real boundaries to the desktop. It's just too small. It's a metaphor. It doesn't fit the kind of scale of information and stuff that we have. We also thought that, one of the real criticisms, and rightfully one, would be culture. We have this rich culture that's grown up over time, and I think is always underappreciated in human-computer kind of interaction, of this kind of cultural backdrop of the fact that we're humans, that we've lived in a certain culture, and we have expectations about that. And we said, sure, that's going to be the case for this kind of thing, but cultures adapt. If there's a better way of doing something, oftentimes cultures adapt and incorporate that. And then, we knew that we're going to be there's not the kind of intersubjectivity that I have where I have with face-to-face and I'm interacting with you. And we sort of said, yeah, of course, but there's no principle and no reason in principle that we couldn't maybe do better than that in the electronic medium, just so we had these other examples where it's sort of better. So we try to respond to that. Okay, a few words, and I probably skipped through these. I think I have more slides than I need here. Another thing that that came out of this paper for us was a notion. We wrote a paper about negotiated access, and the general idea here is that we need some way of negotiating access to us and negotiating access to our information and things about us, kind of thing. And the example that we used to think about this was setting up a meeting, kind of thing. And I think I have a slide about that. I'll skip to that. So it's a very everyday task. It's really hard. You know, if you're a PhD student, you're trying to schedule your defense, and you have this set of faculty who need to be there. You know, it's always hard kind of thing to do. It's easier if you just, you know, are together and you can just talk, you know, and you say, well, you know, you make it next Thursday. No, I can't. I can do Friday morning, and it all gets sort of settled by on that. If you're not that, you're usually doing it by phone or by email or that kind of thing. And it's harder, and it usually goes through all of these iterations and things. And you know, you thought you had a time, and then Fred responds, and Fred can't make that time at all. And we have all kinds of calendar sharing software. We sort of started working on some of this back in those days of how to share calendars. And there's lots of corporations have calendaring systems so that, you know, they can sort of automatically set up meetings. You keep your calendar in this software, and other people keep their calendar, and they can sort of decide on a time. You know, and it's awful. You know, I mean, oftentimes, you know, because, you know, the benefit, you know, Jonathan Gruden wrote this great paper of who does the work and who gets the benefit, talking about calendaring systems. And managers love these calendaring systems because managers love to schedule meetings. Most of us like to not go to meetings and actually do work. Okay, 5 minutes. So we thought about this kind of thing, and we came up with a technique of this negotiated access. And here's just a very simple example, is that you send, you know, you want to schedule a meeting here with someone, and you send them an email, and you send them a token in that email that gives them delimited access to a view of your calendar that they can use to select the meeting. It's even better if you're sending out, say you're interviewing a bunch of people, you can send everyone an email with a token giving them access to the thing. And then they decide when they want to meet with you. And so you maintain control over it. So if you're scheduled, they always, when they go to that thing, they see the current kind of opportunity at that time. And they can decide about that. So it sort of takes you out of this loop of that. And, you know, we spent a lot of time with this. I'll skip over it. Kind of thing. I point you to this paper if you're interested. But I think it's a very generalized thing. I think it's very important. I think there's nothing more important today than sort of managing access to you. I mean, now Google and Facebook want access to you all the time. So you're Googling for something, and they're showing you ads. You know, not ads you often want to see, but ads that they're selling, kind of thing. So they're accessing your attention and pushing you through this kind of thing. And I think we need some kind of mechanism that stands between us and other folks that we can sort of variably control. So, you know, we can be differential in the access to me across different people. We can be differential in the fact of, you know, I'm bored to tears right now, and anyone could access me. I'd just like to talk to someone, you know, kind of thing. And if I had a mechanism of sort of being able to say that, and that's the sort of the germ of the idea in this kind of negotiated access kind of thing. Okay, so I'm trying to finish up here. I'll skip over it here. I'll skip over this generalization of this. And I just wanted to end talking about the world we live in today of all of these virtual classrooms and Zoom meetings and that kind of thing. And lots of folks have contacted me about Beyond Being There because it's sort of relevant to this. And to me, it's sort of very much of the work that's going on is very much trying to still mimic face-to-face. So I teach this once a year, this very popular undergraduate course called The Cognitive Consequences of Technology. But it's also the technological consequences of cognition, you know, and it's an intro kind of course, and it's just grown. I had I taught it last spring. It had 300 students in it. So 300 students on Zoom, you know, and it's sort of really relevant because lots of the stuff we're talking about is in the situation, and even the way of doing it is relevant to the course. So it's sort of interesting in that way. But I just want to end with talking a little bit about some work. This is Oye system that is sort of been sort of virtual kind of interactions. And Kayvon, professor at Stanford, teaches parallel computing kind of thing, has gotten really involved in that system and has designed modified the system and designed a sort of a virtual environment for his class. And he says, last quarter was surprising. One of my most enjoyable quarters teaching. Lecture attendance was up, student staff interaction was up, and my co-instructor and I felt we had a better handle than ever before on whether students were following the lecture. By the end of the quarter, a higher percentage of the class was attending live lectures than previous quarters. The main difference between this last quarter and my previous 9 years of teaching, 100+ student course took place in a new virtual classroom that he created. And I'm going to show you a lot of this, but I think Kayon, and I've talked to him about this, I mean, it sort of follows some of the ideas of Beyond Being There, of sort of like, what are the underlying needs? You know, what are mechanisms I can use in various mediums? So the, you know, 4 of the things, he wrote a little talk about 4 principles of a good lecture. You know, a lecture should feel like an event, something that you want to go to, something that's happening, kind of thing. How do you sort of encourage that? A lecture needs to be constantly reading the room. So I'm looking around the room and trying to see if, you know, people are paying attention or that, and I'm trying to modulate what I say due to that. Students need to feel comfortable in asking questions. And surely in a big 300 lecture, or if people don't feel comfortable asking questions, kind of things. And there's lots of benefits to small group problem solving. So Kayvon sort of tried to build a virtual environment for that. And he, you know, had things like, you know, people could always do these kind of responses. You know, he could ask questions, but he could also say, you know, I'm following that, I'm confused, kind of things. And he gets a sort of a read of the room, the kind of read that you get by looking at people, kind of thing. He, you know, did these minor modifications of being able to do a breakout room, but to have a slide in the room, so that it's sort of like, we're going to break out and discuss, you know, this kind of parallel algorithm or this kind of thing. And I want you to, you know, consider this. And people go out into the small group, and he often made it so that for the whole lecture, people went out to the same room. So it's the same folks involved in that. And I was going to show you a little bit of a lecture, just get a feel for.
All right, so welcome everybody. Welcome to this lecture.
So this is Kayvon.
My name is Kayvon. I'm going to go ahead and make the presentation a little bigger and kill some of this background music real quick for everybody. So hopefully the crowd murmur is gone now, and you can hear me okay?
Crowd murmur going
Great.
on.
Okay, so welcome to this lecture. Hi, I'm Kayvon. I'm sitting here in Redwood City, California right now in my home office that looks a little bit like this, where I did all my teaching during the pandemic and things like that. Thank you very much for coming today. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give a straight up first major technical lecture of Stanford's parallel computing course, which I teach.
Turn on your video and that kind of thing.
And hopefully it provides some value to all of you that might be interested in parallel computing. You're also doing me a huge favor in that I'm just kind of doing a dry run in this virtual classroom to get feedback from all of you, as well as to get.
So I'm running out of time. So I want to get back to California as soon as I can. So I should get to this. I guess I just wanted to summarize. I think the whole point of this paper, and I think it's still relevant today, is to really consider the whole space of alternatives. to not make this artificial limitation that it's just mimicking face-to-face kind of interaction. Not to, again, say anything bad about face-to-face or anything bad about mimicking. Lots of advantages to that. But there's lots of parts of possibilities of the space that, try to exploit the medium, in electronic medium in ways that we can't in face-to-face kind of things. And I just want to end talking about Saaki. Saaki is a psychologist at University of Tokyo, who I used to interact with a lot in the old days. And Saki's he's just a very innovative experimentalist and things. He did these really early kind of studies that really, I think, harbors sort of the beginnings of embodied cognition. And if you've taken any kind of psychology course, you've probably looked at this Shepard and Metzler middle rotation kind of studies, where they show people these three-dimensional cubes, and you're asked, are these the same or different? And the really interesting finding is that the time to say same or different is a linear function of the angle of rotation. So if these two cubes are the same and are in the same orientation, you're really quick. If they're rotated a little bit, you're a little slower. If you're rotated more, and that's a really, common kind of finding, really robust kind of experimental finding. But Sayaki did this really interesting thing where when he presented this to subjects, he put a human figure, a head, on one of these cubes, where it sort of induced you to think about these as not abstract cubes, but human bodies. You could sort of feel like that's my leg, that's my right arm. And what he found was that reaction time was a completely flat linear function. It didn't matter how far the things were rotated. People instantly knew same or different. So, and he only did that not on each figure that an experiment, but just wanted to induce that kind of thing. So Saki's really interesting guy like that. And I sort of end up in talking about these kind of mechanisms in media. Sayaki did some consulting for NTT, which is the phone company of Japan. And they gave him this sort of classic demo. He was visiting, and they showed him this kind of fiber optic link across great distances. And they were, just very taken by how clear things were. You could hear a pin drop, and it was just like being there. And Sayaki's reaction is, oh, that's too bad. He says, when I make a long distance phone call, what I'm really trying to say is I'm far away and I'm thinking of you. And when there's static and the connection is rough, it sort of helps me say that. And suddenly, if it's just like being there, I have to use other mechanisms to say that. So I think there's all kinds of mechanisms in media that that can aid us in saying what we want to say in the ways that we want to say it. And I just want to consider that whole space. So I'm going to end there.
Thank you so much, Jim. So we have a special tradition, Phiteco seminar. We're actually asking our speaker to step out and just for a while, for 10 minutes perhaps. So, and we're going to reflect together about what you said and trying to elaborate some questions for you. So maybe 10 minutes. You can have a walk. You stay not too far away. Yeah. Ok, chers étudiants, chères étudiantes, comment ça va? J'espère que vous n'avez pas trop désarçonné par cette présentation en anglais, que vous êtes parvenu quand même à comprendre certaines choses. Donc, ça me semble très intéressant de revenir aussi sur de faire ce voyage en arrière, de retourner sur cette dynamique qui nous a conduit là où on est, avec des choses bonnes, des choses mauvaises. Et de s'interroger aussi sur l'efficacité ou bien la pertinence de ces outils qui essaient de reconstruire des interactions le plus réalistes possible. Et ce que nous dit Jim, c'est que finalement, le réalisme, c'est pas forcément un idéal, c'est pas forcément la meilleure façon de se connecter à quelqu'un d'autre. C'est pas la meilleure façon d'organiser des interactions sociales. Voilà. Alors, est-ce que vous avez des questions? Et on voit ce qu'on va faire. Vous pouvez poser directement vos questions in English, si vous voulez, à Jim. Sinon, je me charge autant que possible de les traduire. Ça va? Arrêtez des questions. Serge, ouais, je reviens vers toi, Serge.
I'm not sure I understood the difference between media and medium.
Okay, interesting.
He spoke about Google and Facebook sending ads, and he also spoke about some kind of mechanism that its goal was to control, but I didn't quite understand what, so that was my question. Il a parlé d'un mécanisme pour servir d'intermédiaire à Google et Facebook qui envoyaient des publicités. Et son but, ce serait de contrôler, mais je n'ai pas compris la suite.
Revenons donc ces mécanismes qui permettent justement de gagner de l'argent à partir de l'attention des personnes sur Google et Facebook. D'autres questions? Allez, il nous faut des questions. Bon, il y a Serge, bien sûr. Ouais.
Donc, il a présenté des vieilles recherches dont aujourd'hui certains principes ont été appliqués via des applications et dont on voit aujourd'hui les conséquences sociales ou l'impact peut-être négatif que ça. Eux, à quel point ils avaient du recul à l'époque sur les impacts de la technologie quand ils les concevaient et à quel point ils sont étonnés de ce que ça a créé.
Oui, absolument. C'était un contexte totalement différent de celui qu'on a aujourd'hui. Enfin, il y avait des technologies émergentes qui sont arrivées à maturité bien plus tard. C'est intéressant cette question. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on a? Il y a des questions par ici? Non. Serge?
Non, mais moi, c'était pas tant une question, c'est plus, enfin, ça me fait penser à Roland Barthes, Fragment d'un discours amoureux, la dernière anecdote qu'il a citée. Roland Barthes qui montre à quel point la distance aide à construire une relation amoureuse, notamment grâce à l'écrit, la relation épistolaire. On a besoin parfois d'être très loin de l'autre pour justement renforcer, augmenter, reconfigurer la relation à l'autre. Et donc plus largement sur le rôle de l'écrit. Parce que dans les années 90, moi je me souviens de ça, hein, voilà, j'étais dans l'industrie des multimédia à l'époque, on nous disait, voilà, l'écrit c'est quasiment terminé, on ne va plus écrire, c'est maintenant le règne de l'image. Maintenant, on nous annonce le règne de la vocalisation. Hein. On voit par exemple au Brésil beaucoup de personnes qui maintenant vocalisent, enfin utilisent de la vocalisation pour écouter un message qui au départ était écrit, et donc si ça passe pas, il y a des choses qui passent pas, tant pis. Or, l'écrit présente quand même énormément d'avantages. Je pense au travail de Simon qui va présenter demain sur tout le langage logographique, hein, les emojis, et voilà. Donc, c'était plus une réflexion sur le rôle de l'écrit dans la construction de nos relations, et puis le fait qu'effectivement, ça ouvre d'autres possibles en termes de communication. J'ai vraiment aimé ça, le fond même de son discours, et puis cette remise en valeur, si tu veux, de nos communications également écrites.
Oui, absolument. Et quels sont en général les bénéfices de l'asynchronie par rapport à la synchronie dont on cherche absolument finalement et de la distance, absolument. On a besoin de distance, oui, tout à fait. Absolument. Des questions autour de ça? Ouais.
Moi, je me demandais comment est-ce que lui explique qu'en 30 ans, on soit toujours sur une imitation, sur une imitation du réel, alors que lui-même dit on pourrait essayer justement de transcender de plus être dans l'imitation, justement d'inventer des nouvelles manières d'interagir. Et pourquoi encore aujourd'hui, on est vraiment dans cette imitation. Voilà.
Oui, absolument, notamment au contexte du métavers dont on parle tellement. Est-ce qu'on en a vraiment besoin?
Merci. Peut-être une question sur la prise en compte de la politesse et de tous les gestes de politesse dans le développement de ces outils qui visent souvent à plus d'efficacité. Je pensais en l'écoutant, mais j'aimais bien le mail qu'il a présenté pour le calendrier où il y avait toute une présentation avant, qu'on peut aussi faire aujourd'hui avec des doodles, etc. Je me disais, parfois, on partage quand on travaille sur un Google Doc partagé, il s'agit d'envoyer d'appuyer sur un petit bouton, puis ça le partage automatiquement aux autres. Et là, c'est Google qui prend la parole. Et donc, dans ces outils de collaboration à distance et de rencontre à distance, quelle est la part de la politesse dans les designs d'interaction?
Politesse, on dit en anglais, c'est courtesy. Politesse en anglais, courtesy. Politeness. Politeness. Any question? Yes.
Moi, je voulais juste revenir. Il a montré au début une photo un sorte de miroir où une personne pouvait interagir derrière. Enfin, c'était une sorte de vitre. Et juste, ça m'a intéressé parce que c'était dans les années 90. Et si c'est vraiment un truc, une communication en temps réel comme ça, juste s'il pouvait revenir un peu dessus et expliquer plus en quoi ça consistait.
C'est le système de Hiroshi Ishii. Je crois que c'est clair. Bon. That's okay.
Ça rejoint un peu la question still in the imitation paradigm. Je voulais juste rajouter par rapport à l'exemple de la 5G. Justement, si la 5G, elle est plus dans cet objectif s'il y a des éléments dans la 5G qui sont d'exploiter autre chose que simplement copier le face-à-face.
Donc, qu'est-ce que la 5G permettrait qu'il ne soit pas simplement de l'imitation? Est-ce que c'est ça? Vincenzo, tu as une question? All right. Tac, 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 tac.
Tout simplement, en complément donc, de cette question, se demander si peut-être rester dans le paradigme de l'imitation, ce n'est pas la solution de facilité. Quelque part, justement, c'est peut-être plus simple rester dans ce paradigme que, effectivement, trouver des solutions complètement nouvelles.
Ok, je crois qu'on va en rester là, on va le faire revenir. Vincenzo, tu peux allumer le deuxième micro, s'il te plaît. Jim? Okay, James, so we have a bunch of questions for you. And first, sure, you can remote. So thank you so much for reminding us that we need invention to design interaction. And so there's some question of clarification first about the distinction between media and medium. The distinction between media and medium.
Plural versus singular.
Okay.
For us, I think it really, as I said in the thing, a really important thing for us was to think of this as a medium of interaction, and electronic kind of things is another medium interaction, paper is another medium interaction, voice only is a different kind of medium of interaction. And I think it was really key to the idea is to, sort of start to think of this as just a medium. And I think as we move into times of augmented reality and the kind of things where, I mean, being looking at you and my glasses are doing facial recognition and I'm learning stuff about you that way. That's going to be a very different medium of interaction. And I think, important is kind of these boundaries between mediums that become sort of fluid, where, that's why we spent many years looking at these digital pens because we're really taken by paper as a medium, but not just to try to electronically duplicate it, but try to have the best of both mediums to be able to move things back and forth across those boundaries. But I think those kind of fact that the boundaries are becoming permeable, and it's, so I don't know if I'm answering the question at all, but I think medium is.
Are you satisfied?
Is fairly.
Who asked the question?
Abstract.
Are you satisfied by this? Okay. Thank you so much. Another question regarding Google and Facebook. You mentioned that there were some mechanism to send advertisement to your user. Could you come back on this issue? How do they do that? What are the mechanisms they use?
For sending advertisements?
Yes.
And what are our view of that, or what is, I think one of the biggest problems today is that all of the things are being driven by advertising. All of the decisions are being made are advertising decisions. And I think as long as we're on that path, we're going to get a lot of really negative things that are happening. I think on the one hand, I think people are sort of starting to realize the value of their interactions, with, those clicks that are so valuable to Google and Facebook and all of these folks. I think people are starting to realize that that's a value. And a thing that I've been, I guess, surprised at is how little work has been done of selectively sharing that kind of information, of sort of like cooperatives, so that I would join a cooperative and I would share my clicks and stuff with that kind of cooperative. And I might be able to selectively share them. I share various kind of things with close collaborators or students that I would share with other folks. But I think one of the ways forward is starting to take ownership of that information, so that it's not all being just harvested by companies to sell your attention to other companies, kind of thing. And it's surprising to me that there hasn't been more work in that area of how to sort of selectively. You have, DuckDuckGo and things that, are sort of saying, we're not going to share your information. We're going to keep it private, and that's a way. But not that I can join with, things. And just to get back to this personal information space, I think it's one of the things that could be done in this personal information space. It's sort of accruing over time, that you could selectively share that in your interaction with that personal space. So, students in our lab, new students come in, they read a lot of the same papers that other students have read, but they have actually no access to the annotations, the comments, the ideas that other folks do. And if we had these kind of personal information environments that could be selectively shared, so that all of the students could share their annotations or things with something, I think that's a way of harvesting that information that's driven by factors other than advertising.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question, I don't remember well. The negative impact of, who was it? Oh, was the question or?
So I understood that this research are hold, and
I'm
now
not hearing. I think my ears are plugged up from the flight.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. So coming back to the context you described in the 90s, you were facing emergent technologies. And know what your impression regarding the development of these technologies? Do you consider it mostly negative, or do you see some reason to be optimistic?
Yeah, I think the thing we were impressed by back in those days was this movement to a more graphical kind of interaction that suddenly, you know, I sort of grew up on MIT Lisp machines, these very special machines that were designed to run Lisp and were sort of the mainstay of AI in the early days. And then we were doing this early research on Zoomable thing. We're using these very expensive machines, but knowing that those would be commonplace. I think one of the things that's proven to be really successful is trying to live in the future. You know, I think the things that happened at Xerox PARC, where I spent a lot of time when I was a postdoc at Stanford, and it was design of this Alto computer and all of the kinds of stuff that, you know, that we have that are commonplace today. But the way of doing it was to live in that environment then, you know, to spend a lot of money on thinking what the environment is going to be like, or what kind of possibilities, and then live in that environment, you know, and that's what we were trying to do on these very expensive machines. And I think there's not enough of that going on. You know, all of these cycles are getting, you know, used for, you know, deep learning and AI and stuff, but not as much sort of focusing on what the world might be like. You know, when we have this, you know, we have this tremendous amount of computing power. You know, today there'll be billions of Google searches, and every one of those searches takes the equivalent computing of all the computing that went into the Apollo project that landed a human on the moon. Every single one of those things takes that amount of computing. And my feeling is that amount of computing should be putting to the service of people and, you know, and building an environment that is very conducive to, you know, building interactions with people and thinking kinds of things that we couldn't think without that kind of computing. And I don't think there's enough of that living in that future as much as possible, you know, today, to see what it's like. And maybe if we'd done a bit more of that, we would have seen some of the unintended consequences of the internet and of the kinds of things that we're fighting today with, you know, at least in the US, the sort of democracy being in question, whether we're going to be a democratic institution in a few years, and you know, with all of the divisions of people into these almost warring camps, and in case of the US, you know, warring Russian Congress, you know, kind of thing. And I don't know the right way, but it doesn't feel like there's enough of that kind of, you know, that there should be, you know, the equivalent of 1,000 Xerox PARCs, you know, form to sort of like, you know, what's it going to be like, and let's live in that today and see the consequences. Because I think a lot of those are unintended and hard to see, you know, and, you know, or are we just going to stay on this trajectory of advertising, you know, paying for everything?
Okay, thank you so much. Do we have time for some more questions? Okay, one more. And this is about asynchrony, the benefits of asynchrony. So Serge was asking the question.
So thank you for your presentation, Jim. I really liked what you said about the role of writing and written communication.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of what Roland Barthes says in Fragments d'un discours amoureux, Fragments of a Love Discourse. And he shows how love increases with distance and written communication, epistolary relationship. And I think it's very important to remind this when we try to mimic face-to-face communication, how much writing and written communication can build relationships, personal, but also professional relationships.
Yeah, I think of all areas that are underexplored, written communication is probably the least explored. I have a good friend who used to work for me as a programmer. And a number of years back, I got an email from him saying he wanted to go to writing school and could I write a letter of recommendation. So I knew him as a programmer and personally knew nothing about his writing. So I had to write a letter to get him into writing school. And then, I started getting this novel from him, chapter by chapter, and it was pretty good. I really liked it. I'm looking forward to it. And I was just hoping it got published. And not only did it get published, but it was a New York Times bestseller, $1 million kind of thing for him. And we get back together periodically. I actually got back to him just before I came to Paris in September. And we always talk about tools for writing that, if you're a programmer, the kind of very good programming environments we have today. We can, branch the thing, consider all kinds of alternatives. We don't have anything like that for writing, and I think if there was, if I were your age, that would be one of the areas I would consider building tools for writing. And I think this kind of personal information space that we're working on would be really useful in that. But we really need, I don't know if you write like I do. I still write in Emacs. I grew up in Emacs and writing a buffer and I want to change a paragraph. I copy it, I paste it someplace else because I think I might screw it up and that kind of thing. I don't have any of the kind of support for, structure of the writing, the kind of things. I might use Google Docs with folks, but the commenting on that is really awkward and those kind of things. So I think there's a real, and I think that writing is just, that the good writing is so close to good thinking that the two go hand in hand.
I completely agree. Thank you for these thoughts.
Good.
Okay, unfortunately, we have to close this discussion. We wish we had more time to ask more questions. So thank you so much, Jim.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for coming to Campaign. Voilà, désolé pour les questions qui n'ont pas été posées. Si vous voulez discuter avec Jim, il